Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My apologies for my tardiness.
Good afternoon.
Oh, come on, some enthusiasm today. You all should be excited.
Good afternoon.
What happening?
So why just reach a capstone? We could talk about that later. I think that's what it is.
Oh, listen here. I put my all in all into that.
I see that.
No, I had another class. So I was running a little late, and that was their last class, so I had to finish them. I don't want to, and I know you all were so excited. Okay.
This phone breaking up.
Why is phone breaking up? People said that earlier in the other class too. My phone is right in front. All right, let me get up. Let's talk about you. So you want to start with the midterm first? Which one? You tell.
Is it only me? I can't really hear you. I'm not sure of anyone else.
Wonder why?
I know the internet's been poor.
Yes, you are breaking up.
Yeah.
No, you loud and clear. I can hear you loud and clear, Miss Archer.
Okay, so how come you can't hear me?
Anybody else? Can you hear Miss Archer?
No, she's breaking up.
They said
Breaking up?
I don't know why. Someone on someone's phone, I could hear like a lot of little things like aliens in the background. Better?
Better?
Better, yeah.
All right.
Okay, that's something. Okay, so let me not let you all die first. Let's talk about the midterm first.
Sure.
Okay. Since y'all want to have panic attacks and this attack. All right. Got the opportunity to read it. It's very easy. No, yes.
Yeah, well, I saw everything this morning, so yes, I read briefly over it.
Okay, so any questions?
When we write this essay, we're writing as if we are a part of the registrar, like from that standpoint. And what we could do, let me just read this. You have been tasked with assisting the registrar with the functions set out. So how they can go about with those functions?
Yes.
Okay.
Those three. That's in the act.
Okay. Let me just make a note.
Because I've done my research. So I'm not going to tell you what I found, but I know there's nothing on our website. And then I remembered who it was who said they'd put in an application and it was taking too long. Somebody.
I think it was Lisa.
I think it was Lisa. Yeah. So if you look at the act itself, were you able to pull down the act?
I downloaded it, but I didn't really get to look at it. I just said, let me prepare.
Yeah, you need to read it. And you will see that the registrar has certain functions. And those functions is to help it to carry out all of the things we're going to discuss today in class about Npos. So one of the things I noticed that we do is the Attorney General has that task of determining when you submit the documents for an NPO, whether or not it actually meets the criteria of being a non-profit organization and the purpose for which you set it up for. So this is why when you look in legislation itself, let me read you that section. The functions of the registrar, these are the function. A, they receive, consider, and process applications for registration. B, they ensure that all nonprofit organizations have appropriate internal controls in place, including an appropriate system to identify conduct which may involve identified risk. 3, they have to ensure that the financial records relating to a nonprofit are preserved for a minimum of 5 years. D, they have to identify apparent cases of misconduct or mismanagement in the administration of nonprofit organizations. E, they have to receive representations from the public about persons who have engaged in or are engaging in conduct that constitutes or may constitute a breach of this activity or an identified risk. They have to refer cases, F, they have to refer cases or acts of misconduct or mismanagement to the Commissioner of Police. G, they have to enhance the accountability of nonprofit organizations to donors, beneficiaries, and the general public. H, they have to promote public trust and confidence in nonprofit organizations. I, they have to encourage and promote the effective use of charitable resources. J, they have to educate and assist nonprofit organizations in relation to matters of good governance and management, including issuing guidelines or recommendations on the best practice to be observed by nonprofit organizations, fiduciaries, and other persons concerned with the management or administration of nonprofit organizations, issuing model rules, and providing information to NPOs about their rights, duties, and obligations under the Act. K, they have to stimulate and promote research into any matter relating to NPOs, including collecting and disseminating information or research about NPOs, advising on areas where further research or information about NPOs should be undertaken or collected, and entering into contracts or arrangements for research or information about NPOs to be undertaken or collected. L, they have to make appropriate information available to assist persons in submitting registration applications under the Act. M, they have to give information or advice or make proposals to the minister on matters relating to any of the registrar's function or achieving any of his objectives. N, they have to consider, report, and make recommendations on any matter relating to NPOs, including matters that are referred by the minister or that are initiated by the registrar. And O, to perform any other function. So you see that this whole legislation on the NPOs is really, really comprehensive.
Okay, any pointers on what you're looking for in this essay specifically?
Oh, pointers.
It's just so we're on the right track when writing it, like what exactly we would be paying attention to or expect.
Well, the first thing is, or you will be able to confirm after your research, that there's nothing written here on this matter. So you're gonna have to go to other jurisdictions to see how they have approached the NPO and trying to fulfill these functions. That's the first thing. So the second thing is, if you look at the sections I've given you, G, H, and I, how do you enhance the accountability of NPOs to donors and beneficiaries and general public? How do you go about doing that? Being mindful of the categories that are included under NPOs, because there are exclusions. How do you go about enhancing that. So there has to be some internal documentation that NPOs have to be able to complete in order to provide information to the registrar as to who are the donors and where their funds are coming from. It's going to be a little bit of research. I've done mine, I know. But I want you to get an idea of the complexity of the registration of NPOs. Because it's not just as simple, I have an NPO, let me put it in, and it goes to the AG's office and it's coming back in a day or two. If they are following what's in here, there's a lot more requirements and questions they have to ask themselves before they could say approve. And so we'll talk about that too. Okay, so who read the chapter? It's very short.
I read it.
You read it? Okay, so any questions on what's here? Because it's really just preparing the memo and arts like any other company, but the objects is different.
I had a question on the part that, well, the definition really of a nonprofit and the part that has without pecuniary gain to its members.
Yes.
Well, I know that would mean like money
Yeah.
gain, but don't they still pay themselves in these nonprofits?
They do?
Well, I would think so. It's still a business, like to function, to ensure that the company can function. I mean, if you're wealthy, then you probably won't, but I'm sure if you're trying to pay like the admin or for tools needed, wouldn't it come from the nonprofit?
Yeah.
Percentage?
It would, yes.
So that's not considered that then?
No.
Okay.
This was the persons who formed it.
Okay.
Yeah. See, pecuniary gain to its members, that's the people who actually formed it.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you look at a nonprofit organization in the Bahamas, they have listed approved charities. And you have that listing? I'm not sure. Yeah, it's there.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, in the back.
So that's the approved listing. And you know that they issued a notice after the passing of the legislation saying who is not included. Do you have that?
No. I only have a page that have approved charities / nonprofits.
Okay,
There's
so
supposed to be another one.
let me see if I can send it to you. The Office of the Attorney General, they gave the definition of nonprofit organizations from the Act, and then they have exclusions. So they say that for the purposes of the NPO Act, the following bodies are excluded from the definition of NPO. 1, religious or charitably founded schools registered with the Ministry of Education. PTAs of religious or charitably founded schools registered with the Ministry of Education. School boards and any political party or group which was allocated a symbol for the use of its nominated candidates in the last general election by the parliamentary commissioner. They are excluded. NPOs, association, and other bodies not required to register. Social clubs, family reunion associations, condominium, homeowners association, private clubs, all societies, including burial societies, Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants, Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, Bahamas Christian Council, Bahamas National Trust, community associations, alumni associations, trade unions regulated by the Industrial Relations Act, cooperatives regulated by the Cooperative Societies Act, sporting clubs, and jungle groups. They are not included under Npos. So I need to send this to you all for your records. Okay, now, if you wanted to, you form a company, you have your memo and arts. Do you know what is required in order for your company to be registered as an NPO?
The M&A has to be reviewed by the Attorney General. I guess once it's reviewed, you need 3 directors, I think.
You need to provide a register of directors and officers.
Okay.
There's actually a checklist. And the checklist states that you have to have a completed NPO registration form. Have you seen that?
No.
Okay, so
I could look
hold
it up.
on. You can look it up. I'm gonna see if I could find it and attach it. If I can, earlier this week. If I can find it. Okay, see if you can find it online while I'm trying to look it up here. I'm trying to see if I could find it. I'd hoping that Lisa would have been on and she. Okay, that's the capstone. I don't want that. Documents. It took me a while to find it, then I found it. Now I can't find it anymore. You found it?
I think so.
It's called
Let's
an
see if it's,
NPO registration checklist.
I have registration form for nonprofit organizations. On the top,
Okay,
it has
yes.
first.
Okay, so there is a checklist that goes with that. So the checklist says that you must have a completed registration form, certificate of incorporation, any organizational documents, that's any constitution, memo and arts. You have to state the purpose for the NPO, the identity of the controller and the members, along with their passport, voter's card, NIB, and driver's license. You have to submit the register of directors and officers, the register of members, proof of address, and any details if it falls under an umbrella organization. So all of that is your application for a nonprofit organization. I found online yesterday the constituted documents for, what was this company now? I can tell you right now. It was the Civil Society of the Bahamas. It's actually online. They have attached to it. My first question is, would this be a nonprofit organization? Civil Society of the Bahamas. Yes or no? Linda, you there?
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
Okay.
So they represent the nonprofits. I know they had a part in the act, but I don't know if like they are considered.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
So their constituted documents are their memo and arts. I think they also have some bylaws. And they also posted on their website their certificate of good standing, their certificate of registration as an MPO, and the certificate of incorporation of the company itself. Now, if you want to, I can send you that also. Because that'll be like a complete package.
Okay.
So I'll put those together along with checklist. Now let's look at the registration form. What's required?
Would you just discuss with the new application?
No, the actual form which you were looking at.
Okay, it has tick the appropriate box. New application, renewal of registration, projected or annual turnover of 75,000 or more, yes or no. Attach in a separate paper organization contact details for the NPO, contact information for the controller, the purpose of the organization in detail, information on the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. There's a controller declaration saying that the information given is true.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget, if you fall under an umbrella, they want you to give that information also. Which means that you fall under some bigger organization.
Okay.
Now, the question I have to ask the class is, why did we go through all of this? Why did we have to have a legislation just for registration of MPOs? Why was that necessary? We were doing it all along, where you could form a company and then have it registered as an MPO. Why was this necessary to enact the whole legislation?
Maybe money laundering purposes.
It's not maybe, no, not money laundering purposes. It's because they said that that was one of the deficiencies in the Bahamas government legislation, whereby these MPOs were not registered, meaning that we could not determine who was the controller of these MPOs. And so the government had to put legislation in place in order to regularize these NPOs. And you see in the notice in the article from, what's the lady name? Jacinta Higgs. When you read it, you'll see that she said that out of the, how many they had? Out of the 900 MPOs, 580 as at the beginning of this year were registered, which is a lot. entities such as faith-based organizations and community-based organizations to be registered in order to be able to get some of these funds from international organizations. So when you look at NPOs from a money laundering standpoint is a vehicle that is mostly used for terrorist financing. Because if you are planning a terrorist attack, how do you think they go about it? You gotta have an idea of how they go about it. They need funds. And in order to obtain money, they have to get it from persons that have money. And it's normally done through charitable organizations. Now, in most jurisdictions, the NPOs are self-regulated. In one of the jurisdictions that I did my research on, it spoke to the self-regulation of NGOs, and how it is operated in that jurisdiction is their NGOs are actually categorized in the way in which they operate it. So they have charitable, they have education, they have health, rehabilitation of veterans, they have religious, scientific research, cultural, social welfare, youth development, sports development, and then nonprofit educational institutions. And last but not least, they have the civic lead. So they categorize their NPOs in these different categories, and based upon that, then they are certified. And they say in order to be certified, they look for key things. And those key things is whether or not the NPO has a vision, mission, and a goal, whether they have governance procedures in place, whether they have internal management processes, where they have a program operation, financial management, and collaborative linkages. So if you look at our NPO Act and recall the functions that I just said that the registrar has, and within those functions, it states some of these things, organizational function that an NPO has. So in our act, it says that the registrar has the function to make sure that the NPO has appropriate internal controls in place, and they have an appropriate system to identify conduct which may involve identified risk. So that means that the NPOs themselves now need to have a compliance function, because they now have to be able to say, based on their NPO, what are the possible risk that may impact their NPO. And they have to have policies and procedures in place to mitigate against that risk. So that's the first thing that they have here. Then the second thing they say here is they have to be able to identify apparent cases of misconduct or mismanagement in the administration of a nonprofit organization. So that means that the organization must have an internal control, policies, and procedures, and how the NPO operates. And then it says it has to ensure that it has financial records. Another step for the accreditation of an NPO is to make sure that it has financial management. So it also has to have policies and procedures and how it would actually carry out and review and audit its financing. And then it says, remember the question it asks in the application, if there is an umbrella relationship. And that's the same as asking is if there are collaborative linkages, which means does your MPO fall under any other category, any other MPOs around the world? So you can see that the functions within the functions of the registrar, it leads to the same items that are the criteria for the Attorney General and the registrar to decide whether an MPO should be registered or not. So it's not as simple as just putting in an application form and attaching all the documents. An assessment has to be done as to whether all of these criteria have actually been put in place. Any questions? Raven, any questions?
No question.
Okay, so if you look at the Bahamas today, in the article it says that 580 are registered. In other countries, they have gone even further. So on the jurisdiction that I found, they actually did a survey of their MPOs to ensure that they were actually complying with the requirements. They said that 92% of their MPOs have stated vision, mission, and goals. They also have 87% had codes of good conduct. 83% had separate board and management function. Ethical behavior and equality policies were at 84%. Know your employees' procedures was at 78%. Recruitment and performance standards for staff was 81%. Know your donors' procedures, hint, hint, know your donors' procedures was at 69%. Know your beneficiary procedures, hint, hint, was at 83%. Anti-corruption policies was at 68%. Documented policy for planning and monitoring and evaluation of the projects was at 81%. Strategy and annual planning was 83%. Assessment of the MPO's achievement and effectiveness was 85%. And the delivery verification process, such as the beneficiary verification, distribution, and post-distribution monitoring was at 77%. So you see the function of that registrar here in the Bahamas after registration should be able to provide such statistics to the FIU and also to the steering committee, the National Steering Committee, so that they're able to assess the vulnerabilities of MPOs in terms of being used for financing terrorism. So one of the things that they look for when they look at the internal controls for an MPO is whether or not they have a professional ethics standards. That's due diligence and probity checks. And then they look at the governance mechanism. How are they running the MPO? Who's in charge? Frequency of meetings, are minutes being taken? Whether one person is running the meeting or is a collaborative effort. Then they look at sound internal management. So they're looking at policies and procedures and whether they are being carried out. Then they look at program operations. They look at financial management, and also, again, is collaborative linkages. Those are key things for NPOs as they find that more and more, that is how terrorists finance their operations. Now, another thing that the registrar can do is it can ask the registrants, those who have registered already, certain questions. And certain questions related to money laundering and terrorist financing. And to get their perception, to see that they understand why it is that the registrar is doing what they're doing in conjunction with the Attorney General. So they can ask questions that, such as like, based on your perception, that's the NPO, NGO. What is your general level of money laundering risk? What is your general level of money laundering risk and understanding the NGO sector? Then they could ask them, what is the extent by which NGOs in the Bahamas are utilized as a channel for money laundering? They could ask them, what is the extent by which NGOs in the Bahamas are utilized as channels of funds related to terrorist financing? Or they can ask them, based on their own perception, what is the extent of the general level of understanding of money laundering across the whole NGO sector in the Bahamas? And based on the answers that they receive, the registrar should be able to get an understanding as to whether or not that sector actually understands the vulnerability of NGOs to terrorist financing. Does everyone understand when we speak about identified risk and the sectors for money laundering and the vulnerabilities? Any questions there?
Hi, I'm sorry. My internet kept going out, so I'm not sure where you were when you were referring to all of those
You missed a
things.
lot.
Yeah,
You missed a lot.
I guess I'll
Okay.
have to watch it on the video later on.
No, we could recap for you because I'm going to send you some documents. So we started off by talking about the chapter itself is very short. It's about companies that now decide that they want to register as an NPO. And from there, we went on to what's required to be registered as an NPO. And we went to the checklist that's provided on the website, and it lists the documents that are required if you want to register as an NPO. So one was, you have to complete a form.
Which website, sorry?
Now I'm gonna send you all of this.
Oh, okay.
The checklist included a registration form, which we went through, and I'll send you that. The incorporation documents, the Constitution, the memo and acts, the purpose of the NPO, the identity of the controller, along with their passport, voter's card, NIB card, or driver's license, the register of directors and officers, the register of members, the proof of address, and the details of the umbrella organization, if any. So all of those are submitted for your NPO registration. Then I went through the notice that was sent out by the Attorney General's office, which spoke to entities that are not included, or entities that are not required to be registered because they're not categorized as NPOs. And so that list included schools registered under the Ministry of Education, churches, and what was the last one? The political groups that have a symbol. They're not included as charities. So from there, we then spoke about why there's all this, why this legislation was actually enacted. And it had to do with NPOs being vulnerable by terrorists. And they are attractive because a terrorist, when they're trying to execute a plan, they need money. And of course, they get money from wealthy people who believe in their cause. And the easiest way to do it is not to go to the bank and do a wire transfer. You normally send it through a charity. And so here comes the issue that they're having now with a lot of charitable organizations. Where are you getting your monies from? So that's one of your assignment in your question for your midterm is assisting the registrar in making sure that the donors or the beneficiaries, what kind of questions or what kind of forms do you need and questions you need to ask to ensure that you are receiving legitimate funds. They're not for financing of terrorism. Now, I've also sent you a copy of the Civil Society of the Bahamas, the whole package of their memo and act, their bylaws, and I'll also provide you with a copy of their registration, certificate of good standing, and certificate of incorporation. That'll be a full package that you'll receive. So from there, I told them that as a part of the registrar's function, in conjunction with the Attorney General, there are certain things that need to be done. So the registrar for NPOs has to look at the applications that are coming in, and you put them in categories. Now, we don't have any documentation as to the categories that the Bahamas uses. But I told them that based on the research that I did, the jurisdiction that I looked at, they have their NPOs done in categories such as charitable or education purposes, health, rehabilitation of veterans, religious, scientific research, cultural, social welfare, youth development, sports development, non-profit educational institution, and last but not least, civic league. And then I told him that an NPO, in order for it to be approved, and the process that it goes through, they look at 6 criteria. So the application comes in all of the documentation. And in this jurisdiction, they look at 6 criteria. 1, what is the vision, the mission, and the goal of this nonprofit organization? 2, governance. What governance does it have in place in order for the NPO to actually operate and function properly? 3rd, they look at the internal management. They're looking at policies and procedures and the structure of the NPO. The next one is the program operations. So here they're looking at where exactly you're going to be getting your sources from. That means your donors. What due diligence are you carrying out on your donor? The frequency. The next thing they look is financial management. They're looking at your financial record keeping. What reports are you actually going to be preparing? Do you give out reports to other donors or beneficiaries? And then the last but not least, if there are any collaborative linkages, which means are you doing business with other NPOs, or are you a part of a bigger group and certain funds have to go in certain places? Then I told him that in this jurisdiction that I research, their whole NPO is a self-regulatory mechanism. So self-regulatory means there is no audit. So what they did was to find out from their registrants if they were complying, they actually conducted a survey. And they asked questions on every one of these criteria. And they found out at the end that their vision, mission, and goal, 92% of their registrants have that. Their code of conduct, 87% of their registrants had that. 83% had a separate board and management. 84% had ethical behavior and equality policies. 78% had know your employees' procedures. 81% had recruitment and performance standards for staff. 69% had know your donors' procedures. And I said hint, hint, because that's one of the functions of the registrar. 83% had know your beneficiaries' procedures. Hint, hint. 68% had anti-corruption policies. 81% had document procedures for or policies for planning, monitoring, and evaluating their projects. 83% had a strategy or annual plan for their NPO. 85% had an assessment of the NPO's achievements. And 77% had a delivery verification process, such as beneficiary verification, distribution, and post-distribution. So this jurisdiction has actually gone through the whole process of ensuring that its registrants are actually focusing on the issues that are concerned internationally to ensure that NPOs are not used for the financing of terrorism. You'll note from the numbers percent given that the know your donors procedure is kind of low, 69%. And also the anti-corruption policies is low at 68%. One of the other areas that was kind of low was internal risk assessment. Because that is done through either you have independent internal audit or the internal risk assessment, because this is more or less, it could be an internal audit function, or it can be a partial with a compliance function. Internal risk assessment percentage was rather low, but I guess the lowest, because it was at 58%. Now, some of the measures that NPO can put in place to prevent some of the risk that it faces, it can look at having professional ethics standards, making sure that it has the due diligence procedures, and also that they carry out probity checks. And probity checks would be at looking at donors and beneficiaries. They could use more governance mechanism, because we look at governance later down when we do corporate governance. So it's just like running any company. You should have a good governance structure. They could have sound internal management, which means having policies and procedures, program operations, and depends on the diversity of the NPO. So they should have processes to go with each program. Financial management, again, is the accounting policies and procedures, and audits if necessary, and of course, any collaborative linkages. And that's with other NPOs. And then just before you came in, we were looking at as the registrant, the registrar, in carrying out its function, needs to find out whether or not they are actually aware of how an MPO can be used for money laundering. And I was saying that one way to do it is to actually conduct a survey where they could ask the MPO based on their own perception 4 very simple questions. And they can get an idea whether or not the MPO understands the gravity of why this legislation was put in place and the impact of it internationally. So one of the questions I asked is, what is the general level of the money laundering risk understanding across the MPO sector? They should be able to give you an answer. And then you could ask that same question, instead of saying money laundering, ask what is the general level of terrorist financing risk across the MPO sector. Next question you could ask is, what is the extent by which MPOs in the Bahamas are utilized as channels of funds related to money laundering? And then you can take that same question and say, what is the extent by which MPOs in the Bahamas are utilized as channels of funds related to terrorist financing? And then the last question could be, based on their perception, what is the general level of understanding on money laundering, terrorist financing across NGO sector in the Bahamas? Is it between low to medium or medium to high? So that's where we ended right there. Any questions?
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much.
Okay. So again, the registrar has functions, and there are also anti-money laundering and counter financing terrorism questions that the registrar can ask is registrants. One could be, do you have mechanisms in place in case a donor or affiliate or beneficiary is identified as a part of the UN sanctions list? The second question they can ask is, are you aware of designations under the United Nations and the obligations to freeze under the United Nations? Third, you could ask them, have you attended or conducted or organized any money laundering or combating terrorism seminars? And the Attorney General could decide whether or not that period could be every 2 years, every year, every 3 years, every 5 years. And then they could ask whether or not the MPO has any self-regulatory mechanisms to address money laundering or terrorist financing. So it's asking the MPO as to whether or not, let's say it is engaged an audit firm to come in once every 2 years to look at its policies and procedures to ensure that what is in place protects the MPO from terrorist financing. Because the only way you can actually, after you put the law in place, the only way you can actually ensure that the MPOs are being regulated according to the law is to ask questions and then collate it. Because it's not going to be cost effective for every MPO to have an audit or to find a body that's going to go and examine every one of them, because it's going to be a cost and it defeats the purpose of being an MPO. Another thing that the registrar can do is to send out a survey to find out where these MPOs are getting their monies from. And they can actually state the I guess give examples of the different types and then let the registrants tick it. So they could say whether or not they're getting it from grants, whether the funding is coming from membership fees, whether it's domestic donations from a company or domestic donations from an individual, or whether they're getting donations from a domestic NPO. They could say whether or not their funding is coming from fundraising. Of course, they can have international donations. And again, they could the registrar could divide that into whether that donor is either corporate, an individual, or another NPO. So once they're able to gather that information, the Attorney General, along with the registrar, can make a determination as to where the monies in the NPOs are coming from in the Bahamas. They can also take that same questionnaire and asking source of funds and break it down further and ask the registrant as to the jurisdiction where the funds are coming from. Another way that the registrar can get a handle as to what is happening in the NGOs is it can actually ask them, what is the financial channel that the NGOs use? And they can break that down as to whether or not it's banks, whether they use money service remitters, or they use electronic money users, or it's cash. And they can also summarize by telling them what's the preferred method for NGOs, for NPOs in order to move monies to the beneficiaries. It could also ask banks as to which types of NPOs they prefer to onboard. And it gives the registrar an idea as to whether or not there are any NPOs which are being excluded from the banking sector. So in this jurisdiction, it said it didn't matter whether an NPO was small, medium, or large. They were all risk rated high. Any word as to how they're risk rated here? Are they all risk rated high? Because I was not able to find that. No information on that.
I haven't seen anything, but I would suspect they should be high, seeing that you really don't know where a lot of the money is coming from because they're not really regulated so much.
Yeah, now remember now, other jurisdictions have moved towards certain sectors being self-regulated, and they have these criteria that they have to meet as self-regulatory body. So then they would have an audit probably carried out every 2 or 3 years to make sure that they're in compliance. It's not like other sectors. So even though this law has been put in place, I have not read anything where they have spoken about how the registrar carries out this self-regulatory mechanism and what it entails. Because you're gonna find out that we're gonna have the law, we're gonna have the NPOs, yes, they're going to be registered, but who is carrying out the rest? Who's ensuring that they are doing what they're supposed to do? And that's the part that is going to be missing. Because now you see that when you register an NPO, more is required. It's not registered. Okay, let me go and find the money. There are things that need to be put in place. Because it's now a requirement by law. But if you have someone who is actually incorporating a company, registering an NPO, and not realizing that all of these items have to be in place. And the question is whether at the end of the day, when the registrar registers, are they informing the NPO that these things need to be put in place? And that it is self-regulatory, which means it's up to you. If we decide to write to you and you send a confirmation that these things are in place and they're not in place, that we can actually deregister you. I've not heard that part happening as yet. So if we go back to the act, besides the functions of the registrar, they then go into the powers of the registrar. So the registrar has the power to cancel or suspend the registration. And but that is after investigation. And you have to prove that the NPO was engaging or is engaging in an activity that is an identified risk. You understand what identified risk is? Because we're gonna do AML later down. Any questions on identified risk?
Here's the Archer. I have a question on money laundering.
Go ahead.
And accusing persons of it. If you, like, I'm just trying to understand the process. If you have a business, you have an account with a bank, you receive your funds, I guess, through wires. You do all of the bank protocols. They have your due diligence. You fill out a source of funds whenever you're getting in monies. Can you be under investigation for money laundering if you're following all of those protocols? And would you do you have the right to know that you're being investigated?
No, you have no right. It's against the law. If a person advises you that you're being investigated, that's called tipping off. It's against the law.
So, but how would you even think that you're actually being investigated if you're doing everything as asked?
I'm trying to understand your question.
Like why would someone suspect you are laundering in monies if you're doing everything they asked for? Like you're giving them the due diligence they want, you're filling out the forms, you have all of the receipts. Why would someone say that you're laundering money or come to that conclusion?
Okay, well, we could get into that further when we do AML, but let me give you an idea. Yes, you could produce all your documentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you'll learn in money laundering that every piece of paper is not what it actually is. Some of them are fraudulent.
Okay.
So they have to look at what documentation you provide and see if it makes sense with the transaction.
Okay.
Because that's how money laundering takes place. They have bill of lading, they have receipts, they have invoices, but it's all false. So let me give you an example. You have a shipment of furniture coming in, right?
Mhm.
So you have the bill of lading coming from whatever jurisdiction, whatever dock, slot B, container 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, all of that coming from here to there. You have the bill of lading, what's included. The container exists. The contents exist. But within the contents, there are other items. Illicit items, illegal items that are coming in. Or you could have that bill of lading. You could have that furniture on it, but the cost of the items have been increased. So there's different ways you can do it. Or you could send it into the bank and the container doesn't exist.
But it will have to be something that why you suspect it. I mean, because you would have to prove it.
The bank will have to prove nothing.
They just have to suspect. Okay.
Correct.
That's too
Now,
much.
don't forget, when you open your account and as time goes on, the onus is on you as a client to inform the bank as things change. If you don't, then they base it on what they know. So that's sometimes where the client gets in the problem because they don't tell the bank what they're doing. So say if all along you were working at Kelly's, right? And you met someone now and the person say, I'm in this business, I sell cars or I rent cars, anyone, and it's really doing well. You know, if you're interested, I could line you up at who I have my business with and get you some cars and we could work it out and go from there. So you then decide you're going into the car rental business or second-hand car sales, but you didn't tell the bank anything. So then you start bringing in monies. Yes, you have your invoices. Yes, you have your sale receipt, but you need to go and sit down with the bank to tell the bank, my profile has changed.
Mm.
And that's where, and clients, this is what clients do wrong. So let's say the teller or the support person on the opposite side said, oh, we noticed that your profile has changed a little bit, you're bringing in more money. Why are you asking me a personal business? Oh, how did it get before you? But they don't understand there's a gravity to not answering these questions clearly and honestly. Because to the bank, something else is going on. And you're not volunteering the information. So yes, you may bring in your invoices, but to the bank, they cannot take that risk of having either the police or someone else from the international side asking questions about a client, and that client belongs to that bank, and you never raise a suspicion that something is not right. So it's a different side, but the bank has to protect itself, and it will do that by filing.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah. So the registrar, like I said, could cancel. If it after investigation, if it's proven that the NPO was doing an activity that falls under unidentified risk. Unidentified risk can be money laundering, terrorism, corruption, cybercrime, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So after investigation means that, don't forget the registrar also has a function to report if there's any misconduct. They would report that to the police, and then the police would do their investigation. And of course, the investigation would tie into the bank or whatever channel that they use in order to remit funds. They can also cancel on or suspend if you didn't maintain your financial records. And they can also do so if you fail without reasonable cause to submit the declaration of availability of financial records, or you failed without reasonable cause to pay any fees for registration. But they only exercise that power to cancel or suspend on the second occurrence of any of those infractions. If the registrar or the attorney general determine that an investigation into operations of an NPO is necessary, then they can suspend the registration of an NPO during the investigation. And of course, the registration of an NPO, if it has been canceled or suspended, the registrar notifies the minister of the cancellation or the suspension. And they can make a recommendation to the minister for the money or other property received by the NPO to be dealt with by the court. Or that's if it's canceled. If it's suspended, the registrar could make a recommendation prohibiting the nonprofit organization from any money or other property under its control. And of course, if the registration is going to be canceled or suspended, notices will be placed in the newspaper. And of course, you have always being mindful of due process. Before the registrar would cancel or suspend, they would actually ask the NPO to show cause in writing as to why the registrar should not cancel or suspend its registration. The registrar has the power to revoke their decision, to refuse, cancel, or suspend the registration of an NPO if, according to the registrar, there's been a change in circumstances. Now, the registrar can also remove an NPO from the register. And that's if they fail to conduct its affairs in accordance with its objects. And that's why I said you need to have proper policies and procedures. If they fail to submit any return or notice that's required by the registrar, if they fail to maintain any accounting records, they can be removed if the NPO is dissolved. If they refuse to answer any requests by the registrar, they could be removed. And of course, it could be removed if their registration is revoked or canceled. And lastly, they can be removed if they cease to carry on operations. The registrar can also remove a nonprofit if it appears to the registrar that the NPO has changed its purpose, or it doesn't function as an NPO anymore, or it doesn't maintain the required financial records. And of course, again, for due process, the registrar will send a notice to the NPO and advise if there's any default. And unless it's remedied within 21 days after the receipt of the notice, the registration shall be canceled and the nonprofit shall be removed from the register. So on removal from a register, the distribution of assets, if it's an unincorporated nonprofit organization, the Constitution itself should specify how the assets will be distributed after it's removed from the register. If the Constitution does not provide for it, the nonprofit organization shall, by the resolution of the directors, after payment of all debts and liabilities, distribute or dispose of the remaining property to any organization in the Bahamas, as long as it's within the purposes as defined in the nonprofit organization. If upon removal from the register, it is unclear how the assets are to be distributed, what do you think happens to it? If it's unclear, the assets, if it's cash, it goes to the central bank. And if it's property, it goes to the treasurer. The registrar, from time to time, can conduct on-site inspections of the business of the nonprofit for the purpose of satisfying himself that the nonprofit is in compliance. And if the registrar is unable to carry out the on-site inspections by themselves, they can designate a compliance officer or some suitably qualified person to conduct the inspection. The registrar also has the power to require any information related to any nonprofit organization. And it can also request any information that's going to help it discharge its function as a registrar. If the registrar has a belief that an NPO that is exempt with regard to financial records, and that a person is engaged in activities that fall under any one of the identified risks, the registrar will write to them by order and require that NPO to submit any bank records or any information to show its financial status. The registrar can also write to the banks where the NPO has an account to submit any financial records, like I said to you earlier. They have the power to do that. The NPO has to keep a registered address records. And in those address records, as registered address, it has to have, those records have to indicate the purpose, the objectives, and the activities of the NPO. The identity of the persons who are controlled or who direct the activities. As you know, they also have to maintain their financial records. And be available for verification. And of course, they have to, the NPO has to provide a declaration of availability of their financial records. If the nonprofit organization changes its registered office and address, subsequent to the submission of the declaration on the financial records, that NPO has to provide the newly appointed registered office with a declaration, and the new registered office has to submit a duplicate copy of the declaration to the registrar within 30 days. So an NPO has to submit its declaration of availability of financial records to the registrar within 90 days of its registration. And the NPO that was registered prior to the coming of the act had 60 days. And as you recall, there were many notices of extensions upon extensions for persons to register their companies by bills. So the registrar has the authority to write to an NPO and ask them to produce financial records. And the registrar could give notice only where they have reason to believe that the NPO is engaged in activities related to identified risk. And once they have notice, the registrar gives notice that they have to produce records. In the notice, they will actually specify the records which the registrar requires for the NPO to produce. The place which the records specified in the notice must be produced to the registrar, and of course, the period for which they want the records for. The registrar may also require the documents to be produced to a person or persons specified in the notice. The registrar can also ask the person who produced the records or the person who appears or the employee, ask them to provide explanation of the records. And of course, the registrar could take copies of these records. And failure to respond to the registrar to produce these records means that you could be liable to an offense and a fine of $10,000. That's not much, but I think if you're a very small NPO, that's a lot. And that's for the NPO. If it is for the person who's supposed to provide the explanation, if they fail to do so and they don't have a good excuse, and then they also face a fine of $10,000. So the NPO and the individual can be fined $10,000. So that comes to $20,000. Any financial records that are submitted to the registrar is confidential. If the registrar, upon submission of the documents, the financial record, if they determine that yes, they have a suspicion that one of the identified risks is actually being, the information received qualifies it to fall under one of those identified risks. Remember, cybercrime, money laundering, human trafficking, proliferation of weapons, terrorist financing. If when they look at the financial records, it looks like it qualifies under one of those, then the registrar has to consult with the minister and provide those records to the FIU or to the police. Now, the NPO also has to advise the registrar with a declaration that it is maintaining its records at its registered office in respect of donations over $100,000. So if you go back to your midterm question and the items when I spoke about helping the registrar, you will see that when you prepare your procedure for donor, that there is a threshold of 100,000 and above. And that's whether that is made either as a lump sum or an aggregate. The declaration is confidential by the registrar, and it can only be disclosed to lawful authority for analysis or investigation. Records for reportable donations have to be kept for a minimum of 5 years. And they have to be made available for verification purposes. Nonprofits have, once they are registered, they have to submit a declaration of availability of reportable donations to the registrar within 90 days of his registration. And if those that were enforced prior to had 60 days, and like we know, they got an extension. So a financial institution or a non-financial business or profession shall not maintain or open a bank account or account ledger or any other type for an NPO unless the organization is registered. And I don't know if you could recall, many years back, the banks were battling with this, not because of money laundering, but because of KYC from 2000 of all of these NPOs that they had accounts and they had no documentation, no KYC. It is an international requirement that where an NPO fails to renew its registration within 6 months of its expiration, the financial institution has to freeze the accounts until renewal of the registration of the NPO. And then they have to report the freezing to the registrar. And of course, the law speaks to providing false or misleading information or withholding of information. And there's a fine of $10,000 or 1 year in prison or both. And that's if you alter, suppress, conceal, or destroy a document that is required to be kept or produced to the registrar, or you withhold information from the registrar, and that's the fine. Any questions? And of course, because I don't think I mentioned it, the registrar has to maintain a register of nonprofit organizations. And the guidance for the functions of the registrar are required to be published in the official gazette. And of course, the registrar can supply to any person once you pay the requisite fee with copies of any extracts from any document in his possession, which is for the time being open to public inspection in accordance with the Act. So when you look at the registrar, the register actually gives you the name, the registered office address, the telephone number, and the email address. The purpose and activities of the NPO, the identity of the founder and the controller, and the date of the registration of the NPO, and any other information as the registrar considers appropriate. And you could always view the register at the office of the registrar during regular working hours. That's it.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, how you
Hold
said
on.
they have, can you hear me?
No, it's echoing. Try to get the echo out.
Oh, can you hear me better now?
Kinda, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, I know that a lot of these NGOs were like forced to, or not forced to, but asked to register due to, like, when they had Dorian and, all of those donations coming in order to ensure that when people were donating, they weren't like being frauded out of their money from improper NGOs. And you were saying they have a register, but you could only see the register if you go into the office of the registrar. There's no online place.
I mean, the act itself doesn't speak to whether it's manual or online. I'm not aware of an online one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's crazy. Okay.
But if you look at the information, that is actually available, I mean, online, that's a waste of time. I mean, unless they're giving you something different. I mean, really, how that can help you much? It depends. There's not much information. The name, the registered office, the address, telephone, and email.
I would hope that, the fact that you are registered and you have a license per se, then at least the person who's donating, legitimately donating, feels that, they have some recourse as opposed to just donating the Medicaid.
Well, it says yeah, but it's any other information that the registrar considers. If you know our people, that's what it says. Then they just put just the minimum. That's it.
Okay, so there's no online location where I can confirm that this person is legit.
I could find out. I don't know if Lisa knows. They send things to these people, they don't answer. I could know that there is a public, but I mean that don't really help you much. It's not much there. I don't know. I don't see how it helps, but anyhow. Now, being a charitable organization says, whoopee hey. Do you have in your link from Mr. Pratt the VAT guidance on charities? They're not VAT free. Did you know that? No?
No, I didn't know.
You know, okay, so I'll have this one sent to you too. So under VAT, under the Act and its regulations, you also have to be registered.
If you have a tin, you pay that, right?
Yes, but first they have everything as a process.
Right, because it says here on the booklet that it says the charitable and nonprofit organizations must register online and obtain a PIN from the VAT department, so that I would assume then they know how they have to pay that.
Yeah, but they have, see, not all nonprofit organizations will be considered charities for VAT purposes. Yeah, see, first you gotta meet the criteria for the registrar and attorney general. And remember, I was saying at the beginning, I don't know whether based upon their scrutiny and giving a company registration as an NPO, if they have different categories. So you'll only know that if the register tells you that you are an NPO registered under whatever category. It depends on how they have it set up. So after you've done all of that, then you then have to see whether or not you need to be registered under VAT. So if you are a charity, any services you provide that directly relate to your charitable function. So that's why the objects are so important. They are exempt from VAT. So then you don't need to apply the VAT for any charges. And then VAT tells you what exactly are services that directly relate to charitable function. So that's income from any source, most which will be considered to directly relate to the charitable function of the charity. A donation that's given freely to a registered charitable organization is VAT-free. And the same thing if you get any goods or services that's provided by the charity in return for the donation, no VAT. Any small gift or of no intrinsic value, no VAT. So even if you get a donation of goods and services to a charity for nothing in return, the goods or services you provide would ordinarily have been subject to VAT. But you do not have to assess any output VAT. But you have to maintain evidence of your donation. If you're having something like a charity ball or dinner or fair, the charity will charge for attending the event. If it is organized and promoted as a charitable event, and all the funds raised from the event go to the registered charitable organization, and those funds are to be used for the charitable function of the charity, then there's exempt from VAT. So although the event may be exempt from VAT, the charitable organization is still required to notify the VAT department of the event 48 hours before any advertisement. The same thing if you're having a charity auction. Income will be exempt from VAT, provided that the goods that are auctioned have been given as donation to the charity. If they were purchased by the charity, then the auction of those goods is a taxable supply by the charity. If the charity is registered for VAT, you need to declare VAT on the income from the auction. Of course, charity raffles are exempt from VAT. What do you think about if you having a cake sale? If the goods are sold by the charitable organization and they're being donated free of charge, then it's exempt from VAT. But if the goods sold were purchased by the charity specifically for resale as part of an ongoing business activity, then the sale is taxable. And charitable supplies is normally considered a taxable supply. But if the services relate to a charitable fundraising event, or if the proceeds will be allocated purely to the charitable cause, then the charity can treat the services as exempt from VAT.
Can you repeat that scenario? So you have in the cake sale, you bought the stuff to make the cake.
The cake sale?
Yeah, the cake sale, the one
Okay,
that you
cake
gave. You said-
sale. Okay, so if there is cake, gifts, or craft, or secondhand goods, clothes, whatever that is, provided that they're sold by the charitable organization and they're being donated free of charge, the sale of those goods is exempt from VAT. But if the goods sold was purchased by the charity specifically for resale, and it is a part of an ongoing business activity, then the sale is taxable.
When you say ongoing business activity, what do you mean by that?
They say like branded goods, greeting cards. That's the examples they gave for ongoing continuous business activity.
Sorry, you broke up, I didn't
Yeah, so that's what you have to consider if it is from an ongoing continuous business activity.
So like when say these charities have walkathons and they purchase shirts for people to wear on the walkathon, and then they resell them obviously as part of the gift to sign up. They have to pay VAT on the sale of the walkathon.
Okay, they purchase it and then they sell it over.
Right, because you know, like a lot of these places, the Kingdom place for the Protestants, they would purchase T-shirts, buy T-shirts to sell as part of to entice people to come and walk. So you pay $20 and you get a T-shirt. So they're like reselling the T-shirt, but they obviously they purchased the T-shirt. So when they sell the T-shirt now for the $20, they have to pay VAT on those sales. Is what you're saying?
If it is a part of an ongoing continuous business activity.
Yeah,
That's the quote.
Yeah, I still don't understand what the ongoing business activity is.
But I have no clue what that means.
Because they would use, generally speaking, they're using those money to do things that are their charity is for. So the money is raised to then go out and pursue research for Parkinson's or help people in their community to get around because they can't drive anymore and that sort of thing. So isn't that being used for the purpose of the charity?
I'm
NPO?
trying to see right now what they mean by branded goods. I don't understand that. That's when you copy legislation from someplace else. That's what it means, because I have no clue what is branded. What are branded goods? Hold on, let me see. Maybe T-shirts fall under branded goods. And see right now what is branded goods. Branded goods. Oh no. Branded goods are goods that are identifiable of a particular manufacturer or marketing company. Maybe. Thinking
So-
about it.
So if the t-shirt had, say, you know how sometimes you have like sunshine insurance with
Yeah.
one of the,
That's a branded good.
that's the brand that's good then. So
That's a branded good, yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, that's a branded good. Charity shops. I know the Human Society has a, I don't know if that's charity. Charity shops sell donated and
Salvation Army?
Hmm?
You mean like the Salvation Army who sells clothes to buy their goods for like to their soup kitchen?
Yes, they sell mixture of donated and purchased goods.
Mm-hmm.
So once the shop operates on a regular continuous basis, they're subject to VAT. I need to stop in and see if they charge VAT. But according to this, they actually have to pay.
I've never bought anything, so I don't know either.
Yeah, so let's see, where charity provides catering as part of a fundraising event is exempt from VAT. But listen now, if the catering is provided on a continuous basis, like a cafe, then the charity has to pay taxes. Now, if you provide catering and it's for the needy or the elderly, is exempt from VAT. Training and research is also exempt. Welfare services is exempt from VAT. And there's a reminder that VAT exemption is only for charitable activities that have applied to be exempt. And you need prior approval. So does a charity have to register for VAT? It's only required if it makes taxable supplies and the total sales value of the taxable supplies for the previous 12 years has exceeded the VAT threshold, which is 100,000. And the threshold only relates to taxable activities of a charity. You don't include in the taxable activities any income that is received by a charity. That's not included in the threshold. If you're organizing a public event, VAT exemption does not apply to the proceeds. And if you are a registered VAT charitable organization, you could apply for a refund of VAT incurred on qualifying goods and services. And that's your utility bills, any construction or repairs, you can apply to organizations. The forms that you need to fill out in order to be classified as a charitable organization. So I'll send you this one also in your package. Any questions? No, we're happy. Let's turn to the capstone. Where is mine? Mine has disappeared. Okay. Capstone, any questions? I know you haven't had time to read it. Leave it for next week.
Yes, next week, please.
Okay.
Is
As I
the,
give-
the capstone is still worth 20 points, right?
Yes, hasn't changed.
Okay.
And they give you 4 easy questions.
So they're still considered short answer questions. I saw a lot of discussing charts and stuff.
What? You doesn't nothing. There's no word.
About, let me see.
That is not
Let
true.
me quote you wrong. I saw something about presentations and I say this 5 points.
Yeah. There's no word chart here. And that doesn't have to be,
Okay.
because you know, I'm looking for key things. So don't run on with all kinds of things. Once you pull up this documentation, you decide when you start writing the key things you're going to write on from that document. Because you're not writing a long spiel. I say refer to it.
Okay. All right. So I'll look over in the next class. I'm sure I'll have a few questions.
So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 easy questions. Very easy. All right. So next class, we will do trusts and foundations. And we had a case already on trust. Did I send it? Yes, I think we did. I did, right? Send you the
Yes,
trust
you
case.
sent it to
Okay.
read over.
So let's read that for class coming up. And if you have any questions, it could either be terminology or it could be maybe the structure, whatever it is, you could ask the questions. So I'll go over what is a trust, the parties to a trust, the different types of trusts, and then you can ask questions so you can get a good. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So happy reading. You can start your term now. I put the date a little further out, so we would have covered money laundering and compliance.
Oh, I have a question. Sorry. I saw the capstone due date is December 18th. When does the class finish?
Oh, the capstone? Yeah, December 18th. That's right. The
So that
class is the 4th of December, and the final exam is on the 18th. But you can send it anytime before then. But some people, they submit it with the final exam.
also the exam would be around that time, but the class stops on the 4th.
Yes, the exam is on the 18th. You could send me your capstone anytime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on the day of the exam, you just email it to me after the exam or the
I-
night,
Okay.
whatever.
Okay, so I have
Yeah.
a question. The
Mhm, go ahead.
midterm says November 5th, and then the
Yeah.
capstone is December 18th.
Yes.
So, the midterm is supposed to be a take-home exam too, right?
That is it right there.
Oh,
You-
the
do you-
capstone. No, I don't want extra. No.
Okay. That's what
I was just confused because I'm like, I thought the midterm was something else, and then this may be like a final paper.
No. I was going to do it with giving you a full midterm, but company law 2 is different from company law 1. Notice in company law 2, we're focusing on products that are companies, and then they register under other acts. And it changes. So you have a company, then it goes to be registered as act. You have a company, is registered to be an NPO. And then you have trust, which is a total different vehicle. A foundation, which is a total different vehicle.
Mhm.
And then you have executive entity is different. Icon is different. And so those are more looking at products and its features. You'll see in the final exam. And then the second half of the course looks at the different ways in which these products either have been applied or are things that they are vulnerable to. So that's why, based on these products, we now look at money laundering. We look at risk management and governance. We look at FATCA and CRS, and we look at data protection. So it's like two different aspects of looking at it. And so for the midterm, it will be very difficult to give you on the first half of the topics.
Okay, so just in case I'm misunderstanding, so the midterm is capstone.
Yes, no, the midterm exam is that midterm question on NPOs.
Oh, so, okay. So this one here, in reading below, the below article is notice that the strides, blah, blah, blah. You have been
Yes.
tasked with assisting the registrar with the
Yeah,
functions.
that-
Okay, so that's the midterm question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now the other topics that you see on your schedule, trust and foundation, private trust company and executive entities, investment funds and icon, they will be all included in your final exam.
Okay, all right. So I was misunderstanding the
Yeah.
right. So the capstone is like the final papers behind it, and then this question here is the midterm
Right.
that has to be done by November 5th.
Yes. And when we look at the capstone next week, you'll see the capstone also covers certain topics. And so normally when I those topics, I don't include those in the final exam.
Okay. All right. Now I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll talk about that next week.
Okay,
And if you have questions, then we'll go through it.
great. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
All right.
Yep. All right.
Tracking. Let me know if you have any issues on your MPO question. And you can have a look at the capstone and case.
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear that.
No, I said next week, we'll go over capstone. If you have any questions on the midterm MPO question, you could raise it. And please read your case on the trust.
Yes.
All right.
All
So
right.
rest of your weekend.
You too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Enjoy, ladies.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Oh. I have come home by myself. Oh, on the funeral. Yeah, it was changed. I'll send you when it's finished. What time you say 3:30?